Hello and welcome to another episode of Mean Brews. Today I'm covering American Amber Ale. Let's get right into the data. I found 35 American Amber Ale recipes, 1 best of show, 22 gold, quite a bit of the proportion is gold, 5 silver, 4 bronze, and 3 award winning. The BJCP style is 19A, a amber, hoppy, moderate strength American craft beer with a caramel malty flavor. The balance can vary quite a bit, with some versions being fairly malty and others being aggressively hoppy. So good variation there. When I looked at the evolution of the style, there's really not a lot of evolution of this style since it started. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. There is a little bit of variation between recipes, and you'll see that in the data. Original gravity, anywhere between 1.052 and 1.074 on the high side of the BJCP range. The average was 1.059, and that's where my recipe will be. Final gravity, anywhere between 1.01, 1.018, with an average of 1.014, and my recipe shakes out to be a little bit less than that, but still within the BJCP range. IBUs from 18 to 66, big range here. On the high side, half of the curve, half of the recipes are higher than the highest in the BJCP range. Perhaps BJCP should be updated. The average was 39, and I will be on that average as well, 39 or 40. For the color, we had anywhere between 10 and 18.5 or 19. You can see the colors here. The average was 14.1 or 28 EBC. I'm going to be on the high side just based on where I land, even though we are seeing some evolution of more lighter colored. Let's see, back to 13. So right around here is where the trend is going. For the malt percentages, the average was about 82% base malt. The next most prominent was Crystal at 14. Toasted malts, 3.4. Roasted, 0.5%. And just one recipe used adjunct at 0.2. We are seeing an increase in the roast. Going back, roast is 3.4 average, but we are seeing an increase to around 5 or 6% in the amount of toast malt, not roast, toasted malts used in this style. Now, if a recipe, for only the recipes that use that malt, the average for the base malts was somewhere between around 67 to 95% of the grist, and I will be just under the mean here. Zooming in on the others, the next most prominent, 100% of the recipes used a crystal malt at an average of about 14%, but a big range here. Toasted malts, again, we're at about 60% of the recipes use a toasted malt at an average of about 5. Roast malts, 40% at an average of about 1. And then that one recipe with an adjunct in it at about 8%. For crystal malts, I'm going to be right at the mean at about 14%. Toasted malts right at 5%. And then roast, I'm going to be on the low side. It was getting too dark, so I pushed it down to the low side of the roasted malts. Base malts, we had 5 different base malts used. I had a 2-row or Pilsner. I lumped them together because they're not the dominant flavor profile for this style. 100% of the recipes used a 2-row or a Pilsner. Anywhere between 35, I think it was 35%, up to 86% of the grist, with an average of about 75%. 75% of the grist. The next most prominent is Munich. 47, about half the recipes used a Munich malt at an average of 11% of the grist. And then we had some wheat, Vienna, and rye malts in less than 20% of the grist, so we'll ignore them for this style. I'll be at about 70% of the grist using 2-row, American 2-row, and at about 11% of the grist using Munich malt. Close to the means. Crystal malts, we had about 6 recipes used, or 6 different crystal malts used for this style. The most prominent is the light crystal or Caravienna, somewhere in the 10 to 40 range. 68% of the recipes used a light crystal at an average of 9.3% of the grist. A medium crystal or Caramunic, 62% of the recipes used a medium crystal at an average of 7.6% of the grist. And then dark crystal, 44% of the recipes used a dark crystal at an average of 4.1% of the grist. We also had carapils here. A quarter of the recipes used carapils. A couple recipes used special B, then one used golden naked oats, which is a crystal oat malt. I'll be using for my light crystal around 6%, around 5% for the medium crystal, and under the curve at about 3.5, I think, for the dark crystal. Toast malts, we had 4 toasted malts used. Victory or biscuit malt was used in 44% of the recipes at an average of about 5% of the grist, 4.7. I'm going to just use a Victory or biscuit malt at 5% in my recipe. Others used were melanoidin or aromatic or special. I know that's spelled wrong. Special roast in one recipe. Roast malts, I don't know what happened to this curve, but there are only 2 data points. Most common was chocolate malt at about 44% of the recipes used a chocolate malt at an average of 4. That's not right, 4.7. It's 1.25% of the grist. And I will be down here on the bottom end of that curve at about 0.5% for chocolate malt. Again, trying to achieve the color that I need. The one adjunct that was used was flaked oats at 8% of the grist. We won't be using an adjunct on this style. Bittering hops, we had quite a few different bittering hops. The most prominent were Cascade, Magnum, Centennial of the 21. They make up about half of the recipes. Horizon, and then some others were used for bittering. So not really important, but I will be using Cascade, and you'll see why in a second. Flavor hops, we had 16 different flavor hops used. Cascade, Centennial, Willamette, Citra. Almost 2/3 of the recipes used those 4 hops, and I'll be using Cascade. Cascade and Centennial, very similar flavor profiles, so 50% of the recipes showing that's the dominant flavor you should be using. Same with the aroma hops, Cascade, Centennial, Willamette, Citra. Again, 2/3 of the recipes. There's not 6, there's more than 6 aroma hops here, but again, that citrus grapefruit flavor from Cascade and Centennial dominate the winners here. And I'll be using Cascade for aroma. Whirlpool, Cascade, Centennial, Citra again, and some others. We only had 6 Whirlpool hops used, and I won't be using a Whirlpool hop for my recipe. Dry hops, we had 8 dry hops used: Mosaic, Centennial, Styrian Goldings, and some others. These are all just one-offs. I won't be using a dry hop. The data didn't support it here. Hop rates, the black curve is flavor hops. 77% of the recipes used a flavor hop, anywhere between 0.8 and 0.45 ounces per gallon. The average was 0.21 or 1.57 grams per liter. That's about an ounce in a 5-gallon batch. Aroma hops, curve were very similar, but there were some very, very highly hopped aroma hop additions in one recipe. Average was 0.26, or that'd be about a 1.25 ounce in a 5-gallon batch, or 1.95 grams per liter. Whirlpool hops, only 11% used the Whirlpool hops, which is the red curve, which is why I didn't include it. 0.24 was the average. And dry hops, we had one way off the chart here. Somebody trying to do something different. 20% of the recipes used a dry hop at an average of 0.5 ounce per gallon, or 3.59 grams per liter. Again, not enough to warrant me pulling it into my recipe. I'll be right at the mean for flavor hop and a little high on the aroma because, and not using Whirlpool or dry, we are seeing an increase in the amount of aroma hop used over time. Not surprisingly, beers are getting more hop forward, and this is a style that carries that really well. Mash type, dominant single infusion mash is the way to go. These step mashes were some of the older recipes with less modified malts. So I'll be following the single infusion with my recipe. For the steps, the protein rest average was 124 Fahrenheit, 51 Celsius for 24 minutes average. Beta rest, 147 Fahrenheit or 64 Celsius for an average of just under an hour. And then the alpha rest, main saccharification rest, anywhere between 148 and 162. But the mean was 154 Fahrenheit or 68 Celsius for an hour. I will be on the low side because this is an area we're seeing a little bit of evolution here, to about 152, so 2 degrees lower on the mash temp. Boil duration anywhere between 60 and 90 minutes with an average of 68. I'll just be doing a 1 hour boil for my recipe. Yeast, huge dominance of the Chico strain here, followed by some British and American strains as the makeup for the others. Not a lot of variation here, but Chico is what I'm going to be using for my recipe. 13 different yeasts were used. Water chemistry, the average calcium was 75, 13 magnesium, 30 sodium, 87, sorry it cut off over here, 87 sulfate, 71 chloride, but a big range here of water chemistries. I'll be a little bit shy on the calcium and the magnesium, right on the mean for sodium, and right on the mean for sulfates and chlorides. Fermentation temps, anywhere between 62 and 68, with an average of between 66 and 67. 66.5 is the average. I'll be at 66 for my fermentation. Carbonation volumes, the average was 2.44, and the average mash pH was 5.41. Before we get into the recipe, I just wanted to, I took note of this when I was studying this style. It seemed to follow very closely with the hops and the yeast used to American Pale Ale. However, there was a divergence where American Pale Ale started using different yeasts that were more fruity and started using hops that were more fruity as well. And I'm curious, this style kind of stayed steady. I'm curious if we went back and revisited this style of beer using a more fruity dominant, maybe a Boddington strain or something like that yeast, and some more of the new mosaics or citras as your hop flavor. If this would cause this style to have a resurgence. But as it is right now, this has stayed pretty steady into the original variation that it started out as. So for the Mean Brews recipe, just to recap, we have about 70% two-row, 11% Munich. Those are the base malts. For Crystal, 6.2% Crystal 40, 5.1% Crystal 60, and 2.8% Crystal 120. My toast malts, 5% Victory, and 0.5% of chocolate malt. My hopping is going to be Cascade all the way through, 27.5 IBUs or whatever you need to get that full IBU amount of Cascade at 60, and then 0.21 ounce per gallon or 1.6 grams per liter of Cascade at 15, and then 0.35 or 2.6 grams per liter Cascade at Flame Out. And use the Chico strain and get it pretty much anywhere. They're all a little bit different, but whatever's the easiest for you to purchase and use for this will work. We're going to shoot for original gravity of 1.059 and 40 IBUs. Water chemistry, again, pretty balanced here between the sulfates and chlorides. Mash pH of 5.39. I'm going to do infusion mash of 152 Fahrenheit or 67 Celsius for 60 minutes. Mash out, sparge as usual, and boil for 60 minutes. Chill it to 64 Fahrenheit or 18 Celsius and pitch about a 1 liter starter for this 5-gallon batch. Ferment it at 66 and then raise it up as it teeters off towards the end and hold it for a week to clean itself up. And then you can bottle condition or transfer it to a keg, 2.4 volumes of CO2. That's it for today. Next style, I'm going to put another poll on YouTube. Try to hit some more wintry beers, maybe some stouts or some other darker styles that might go well in the winter. So tune into YouTube and please vote on the poll, and we'll see you in a few weeks. Thanks. Bye-bye.